Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday to you all. Hope you guys are having a great week. On today's Training Tuesday, we'll be discussing a CPO notice that just came out last week, 2021.01, concerning ratifications. And we have a new ratification form to make that process and expectations a little clearer on what's going to be needed there. We have a separate standard terms and conditions. If you may or may not know, the terms and conditions are required for all procurements. And so we'll talk about that a little bit as we separated them out. They were connected to a basic ordering agreement. So if you were using BOAs for small purchases, you've already had that covered. But perhaps you're not using a BOA on a smaller procurement. So maybe those small purchases less than $10,000. But we still need to have our standard terms and conditions. So we have those separated and out on our CPOGS website. For our bid buy activity today, we'll talk about setting up a proxy. As we get to that time of the year where people are, vacationing and are going to be out of the office for a little bit. And you need to set up a proxy. We'll walk through that. And then we have our fun fact of the day. So let's start off with the CPO Notice 2021-01. So our first CPO notice for fiscal year 2021. We have the link to the CPO notice here. I'll go ahead and just bring that up, as well as a link to the new ratification form. Okay, so let's go to the CPO notice first. And so Section 5060 of the Procurement Code provides, quote, if any contract or amendment thereto is entered into or purchase or expenditure of funds is made at any time in violation of this code or any other law, the contract or amendment thereto may be declared void by the Chief Procurement Office. So that may be is the important part there. Or may be ratified, right? Once again, that may, provided the Chief Procurement Office determines that ratification is in the best interest of the state. So when an SPO determines that a violation of the procurement code has taken place, the SPO will notify the agency of the violation and that any resulting contract, amendment, purchase, or expenditure of funds may be void unless the CPO ratifies and affirms it as being in the best interest of the state. So if an agency seeks ratification, then the agency shall complete and submit the ratification request form, which is on our CPO GS website. This form found on the CPO's website. Reach out to your SPO with further questions. So that's the CPO notice. Now I'll pull up the ratification request form. And first off, I always want to show you where they're at. So we go to the CPO GS website. They live in the Procurement Resources Library with all of our other templates and forms. So solicitation and contract templates and forms is where you can find the new ratification request form. And if you scroll down, you can see it has a nice new big new icon next to it. You can click on that. So let's take a look at the ratification request form. Now, the reason why we actually have a form now is to make it very clear what the expectations are. So for instance, perhaps you executed a contract without SPO approval, for instance. You need to put in the bid by reference number, the title of the procurement, agency. You have a drop down here. It's a fillable PDF. So just really what this form does is it makes it a little bit more, the expectations are clear, what's going to be needed. Because going back to the code, the CPO may void the contract or may ratify the contract. So it really just depends on what the situation is. But we're going to need all these different fields completed. So the actual what section of the procurement code or other law was violated needs to be listed here. So the agency, in order to do a ratification, the agency has to declare what there was a violation of the code. So that's the really important piece to get out of this, is that you have to point to what was violated. What steps has the agency taken to prevent further occurrences of this violation? A corrective action plan. What were the circumstances that caused? You really just need to go into what happened to the violation of the code and what happened with that. And then you have the APO signature as well as the director. So the head of the agency is going to need to sign this document. And then the CPO will either deny or determine that ratification is in the best interest of the state and approve that request. Okay, so another piece of information other than this ratification request form is also, go back to our slide here. So we have the, I showed you where they're at, as well as the completed ratification form, and then also the contract or amendment, depending on whatever the document is, should be attached and sent to the SPO for to send to the CPO's office. So not just the ratification request form, but we also need that contract. So say, going back to the example I said, if the contract didn't receive SPO approval, for instance, before executing the contract, attach the contract, or if perhaps it was an amendment, attach the amendment that should be sent to the SPO there. Okay, we have a question here. Can you talk about the difference between a contract which needs to be ratified versus a late execution waiver request? Excellent. That's a great question. So let's talk about that. So the difference between a late execution waiver and a ratification. So a late execution waiver would be that request would come into play if the contract was not executed by the agency or for the vendor for whatever reason before work started. The ratification would be kind of the exact opposite, that if there was any violation of the code, the example that I'm using is perhaps the agency executed the contract, they have a fully executed contract, but there was no SPO approval prior to executing that amendment or that contract. So the two differences there, once again, the late execution waiver, that the contract did not get executed on time before work started. That could potentially be working for renewals as well. Whereas a ratification is the execution of the contract occurred, but there was some violation of the code prior to that. For instance, that would be if the SPO did not give authorization or approval to execute the contract. Great question. And these forms, as they're developed, it is to make those expectations a little bit clearer and to provide an actual form of what's needed. So there isn't as much back and forth between agencies and the CPO's office in these instances. Okay, any other questions regarding the new CPO notice or the new ratification form? Okay. So now we have a separate standard terms and conditions. So the procurement resource library on the CPO GS site, we have the link here, but just to go back to how we get to that form, it's the same exact thing. You go to the general services, I click on the procurement resources library. Within the procurement resources library, we have our CPO notices, CPO memos, solicitation and contract templates forms. I select the solicitation and contract templates and forms, and we now have a separate standard terms and conditions. So I'll click on that and make that a little bit bigger. There we go. So our standard terms and conditions need to be on all those procurements. And we get this question quite a bit. Why do we have, a BOA under 50, BOA over $50,000, and a separate standard terms and conditions? So for your basic ordering agreement, if it's also in our solicitation and contract templates forms, you can see here we have the BOA under 50, BOA over 50. If you remember those $50,000, that's where additional procurement requirements kick in, such as Board of Elections, financial disclosures, conflicts of interest, et cetera. So that basic ordering agreement, if I would open that up, it actually contains our standard terms and conditions. So if you are an agency that uses BOAs for all your small purchases, you don't have to have a separate standard terms and conditions. So if I scroll down through our BOA, you can see there is our standard terms and conditions. But for a smaller purchase that wouldn't necessarily have, if you're not utilizing a basic ordering agreement, we still need to have those standard terms and conditions as a part of the procurement file, so the vendor can see those as well. And so what we've done is just separated them out and now they are here as a separate terms and conditions. So if you're still utilizing the BOA, you don't have to have, I mean, that's just going to be duplicative. You don't also need to attach a standard terms and conditions. But if you're not using a BOA, so really what I'm looking at here is probably those small purchases that you aren't using a BOA for because of the lower threshold there. Okay, but we still need to have those standard terms and conditions, so the vendor has those. And so those are on our small purchase job aids, but we just had not separated standard terms and conditions out. So I think some agencies might have attached a BOA and been using those for even those small purchases less than 10. But now it makes it a little bit easier for you to have that standard terms and conditions as a separate document. Check my questions, no questions. Okay. And that leads us to our bid buy activity for the week, which is going to be setting up a proxy in bid buy. So we have a question. Does that include terms and conditions for POs as well? Well, you would have attached it earlier in the process at the bid stage. So terms and conditions for POs. I'm wondering if you're asking if the acknowledgement at the PO, or in order to put in a bid, I should say, that the vendor has to select, yes, I agree to terms and conditions. That is more of a system requirement. It's a hard stop within the system. Really, what our terms and conditions, what that comes down to is, for instance, a vendor doesn't get paid, or they try to sue the state of Illinois, something like that, and they try to use their state's or their company's terms and conditions in order to, as a part of a lawsuit or something like that. That's why we need to have our standard terms and conditions very clear and shown to vendor when we put out a bid. If I didn't answer that question, if you are asking something different, just let me know. We have a question, is the standard terms and conditions needed if it is a release from a master? No, that is not. Great question. But anytime we're releasing off of a master contract, those terms and conditions are a part of the original contract. So you wouldn't have to go ahead and you wouldn't have to have a separate standard terms and conditions. Let's see, I have another comment here. Some agencies use a PO as a contract, not the bid buy PO, but an agency PO. Okay, so going back to the question, does that include terms and conditions for POs as well? That would still need to be a part of that procurement file of having those standard terms and conditions there. Okay, so let's go in bid buy and set up a proxy. So how we set up a proxy, we go up to the upper right-hand corner where the little silhouette of a person is. We click on that. This is where you would change your roles if you were going to be changing from, purchasing or department access. If you scroll down, you hit My Account. It's going to open up your information in your account, and I can click Edit. Once I select Edit, this is where if you're going to change anything as a part of your account, you can go in. If say your phone number changes or you want to change your password. But we have here proxy user. So if I'm going to be certainly this is for your approvers. This is would be very important if you're going to be gone on the beach week or whatever. You need to set up a proxy user. SPOs, we use these as well. I can go in and select whoever the proxy user is going to be. And what's nice about it is you can if you always are going to have the same person to be your proxy, that person can just stay there, and then you're just going to activate them or deactivate them. So you can select anybody on the list, select them, and then I activate them. And then I'm going to have to go in and put in my password in order to activate that user. So if I go in and Then I select save and exit. Oh, and I didn't put in the right password. But that's exactly what you would do. You would click activate proxy user, and every time when you go into bid buy from that point on, it will say, do you want to keep this proxy user activated? So that's a possibility as well. So fairly easy, but like I said, this time of year, it's probably good to know how to put in a proxy if you're going to be on vacation. All right, so now we get to our fun fact of the day. The last 2 weeks because remember last Tuesday was National Junk Food Day. This week, it's National Milk Chocolate Day. So everybody have a great rest of your week. We will record this. They'll be posted as usual. We'll be sending out the slides per usual, and let me know if you guys have any other questions. I see some of you prefer dark chocolate. I understand that, but today's milk chocolate, so. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your week. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next Tuesday.